from in the first place. So from an adaptive standpoint or functional standpoint, makes perfect sense that what you want to do is like, those emotions are negative. Let's cognitively reframe, adapt, grow, work with this negative regret, try to get rid of this negative regret. But I think the next step, and this is kind of where I see you, and this is why I think you're running into trouble, because I think your tactic won't work for these problems, is my sense. So like you can logic your way to a functional life where you get up every day, you're optimizing things, you're progressing, you're doing well. Right. And this is where, like, when I've worked with people in the past, I don't think this is a problem. I mean, there may be psychological problems related to trauma of growing up with ADHD, but that's between you and your provider and your therapist and all that good stuff. We can talk a little bit more about what that looks like and non-pharmacological approaches if you want to.
Sure.
But I mean, I think this sounds to me like a spiritual crisis more than anything else. Like, that's what it feels like. And these are like bigger, deeper questions of, sure, you can justify, which is what you always end up doing, right? It's like, you can justify this as, okay, like, this was part of my path and it's made me who I am. And like, I'm doing okay in life. So like, I should not regret the past. But what I don't actually hear you doing is metabolizing the regret. I don't hear you getting to the source of that and trying to figure out and I think there's like a tier above this, which is, there may be some problems to me saying that, but which is like understanding that you do regret and that it is okay to regret and that you can still be happy with what you've accomplished. But I think that's like very hard for you because of like that self-judgment of I should have been perfect.
I understand what you're saying. The spiritual crisis was definitely like probably a year and a half ago, I think, is when I was trying to think of like, do I want to just sit online and kind of, move sideways, do decently, or do I want to be more aggressive with my career? And then that's when I kind of thought more about like obligations to society and all of that. And I feel like, I'll say that was spiritually solved, but obviously there's still other issues that I'm trying to figure out, like medication, right? And that was why in the past year and a half of my career, I've been way more aggressive in terms of doing other things. I do agree with you about what you're saying. You call it metabolizing your regret, but I'm trying to say in other words what you're saying so we can make sure I understand. I think there's a negative thing that people will do where, say you have an abusive parent, where somebody will say something like, actually that abuse was good for me and my life is so much better because of it. And in a way that might be better than walking through life being completely traumatized by it. But like the next level would be saying, well, actually that abuse was really bad for me, but I understand that, I've made peace with it, and then I've overcome it and I'm moving in a forward direction. I feel like for the most part, like there are definitely things in my life when I say I have no regret, I guess we could dig a little bit more meatier into that. Obviously there are things that have not gone as I would have liked it, and there are things that kind of suck in terms of my upbringing, but like I've made peace with those things. I don't think that I don't let them drag me down. Obviously if I could have chosen different types of things in my upbringing, I would absolutely like change the way that some things are, but I think everything's going okay now, so I don't let those regrets like weigh on me, I guess. It's not like go ahead.
Yeah, so I like, even in your language, I think there's like, and this is what I think is really where there's opportunity for progress, is like actually has nothing to do with whether you should take stimulant medication or not.
Sure.
This is really a fantastic opportunity for you to understand the different currents within yourself, right? So what I get the sense that you're focused on is when you have conflicting currents, you have a pretty rigorous process of like getting all the troops in line, right? So like and that's good. I mean, you're good at that. You're gifted at that. It's a useful thing to do. It's adaptive. It's cognitive reframing. It's what we try to do in CBT. But there's like, you're spot on that there's another layer of this, which is to ask yourself, like, why do I feel this way in the first place?
Okay.
Right? Why, like, what is the origin of this judgment? Because imagine if you could get rid of the judgment entirely, not get it in line, but you could understand that, and this is what I think happens, is you can cognitively reframe. But basically, if you look at sort of this yogic model of the mind, what happens is when we have negative emotional experiences, those emotions get stored up and they sit in our subconscious mind or our unconscious mind as something called a samskar. And that those emotions will trigger and activate in current circumstances. And so in a situation like yours, what I'm hearing is an echo of the comparisons that you used to make in this idea that you should be able to do what other people are able to do. That is like a core part in CBT. We may call it something like a core belief, right? And so as long as you have that piece, you really need to understand, like, why do I think that way about myself? Because if you sort of think about it, like, logically, right? I mean, everyone's unique. Everyone, and I know you do this process. This is the part that you're good at, right? Everyone's unique. Like, you can't always make comparisons, and everyone has advantages and disadvantages. We get a certain amount of stat points to distribute on our character sheet, and that's how it is. I took the ADHD thing for an additional feat at level 1, and that's just how it works. And I got debating proficiency, whatever, right? So there's whatever breakdown that you have, which you can kind of logically understand. But I think now the question is, like, you know, why do you feel this way about yourself? Why is your worldview such that, like, you should be able to do it without it? Right. And that, I think, will go back. That, I think, will go back to, like, if you really pay attention to your early experiences in childhood, which, by the way, is another thing that I just connected the dots on. I was really confused the first time we talked because you play games while you're debating with people, right?
Well, I haven't for the past 2 weeks while I've been on amphetamines, but yeah, I understand what you're saying. I used to a lot, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that is not a coincidence that you've stopped. So there's
I don't think it's not at all. Yeah.
There's good evidence that doing a cognitively distracting rote task allows people with ADHD to focus. So when I'm doing group psychotherapy with people with ADHD, I will oftentimes, what I learned at one of the hospitals I worked at is knitting. That if they do some kind of rote or even cognitively mildly engaging task, it actually helps them focus, because they have, like, too much kind of mental energy, and, like, dispersing some of it allows them to actually focus.
Yeah.
This is also why people with ADHD sometimes meditate better with their eyes open.
Okay.
So you need some kind of stimulation, which is something that's interesting. And also, if you started stimulant medication, it would make sense.
Yeah, it all tracks.
You no longer need. Yeah. So where are you right now? What are you thinking? Thoughts, questions?
I'm writing down, like, big concepts, I guess, to keep track of. The first question of, like, what does it mean to take a pill? I think there's a lot of room for me to think about and explore how I feel about that, because all of my feelings related to that are negative, and most of them are, I think, really stupid. They're rooted in stupid things. Like, I know that looking on it intellectually. And then why did I write this down? I wrote judgment in big caps. Oh, why do I judge myself, I guess? Or against, like, what standard do I judge myself? I mean, I feel like judgment is probably a necessary part of, or you were going to say something, sorry, go ahead.
No. Yeah, I think you're okay. So let's talk about pills for a second. So okay, sure. Why do people have stupid beliefs, Stephen?
For all sorts of different reasons. I mean, they could be maladaptive. It could be
sure.
They learned it from other.
No, but I mean, like, why do people develop stupid? Like, so you said, okay, I have all kinds of attitudes towards medication that are stupid. Then why do you have that attitude? Where does that attitude come from?
It's probably an inherited belief that's largely unexamined because it doesn't come up much in daily life, basically. Yeah.
Okay, so I think that's one way to put it. I would chalk it up to an experience, which could be what you call an inherited belief.
Yeah,
I think
my dad and my grandpa were like, I don't believe in medicine,
right.
I don't care about this. And then now I'm like, if I get a headache, I don't like to take ibuprofen or Advil, which is stupid, but it doesn't come up that much, so I don't examine it that much, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't think it's an inherited belief. I think it's a learning, is what I would call it.
Oh, sure. So when I say inherited, I mean, like, you learn it, but you're right. Yeah, learn is a better word.
Right,
for
right.
Sure.
So you had some experience early on in life where, like maybe you were sick and, like, the doctor recommended that you take ibuprofen and you were really hurting, and you were like, Dad, should I take the ibuprofen? And he's like, ibuprofen is for sissies. You don't take ibuprofen. And then you felt guilty or bad because you really wanted it and the doctor said, but you didn't want to be weak, right? And then, like, that whole thing starts. I mean, I have no idea if that's actually what happened, but that's an example.
Okay, sure.
So I think one thing to understand anytime you examine your stupid beliefs is you can do the cognitive reframing stuff. But I have found it to be very, very helpful to understand the origins of your experience and why that became a truth for you and how that became a truth for you. Because at some point it was learned. That's why you believe it, right? Second thing about judgment is, I think exploring the origins of your self-judgment are very important.
Okay.
And so if you really want to, because right now what's happening is you have a clash between, like, a self-judgment and a logic.
Okay.
Right?
Can I give you my idea about judgment first so that we're using the same words?
Yeah.
So I feel like judgment is a necessary part of your self-analysis, because it allows you to more closely align yourself with whatever your idealized version with yourself is. So for instance, let's say that I think I should be somebody that is truthful to my friends around me, and then let's say that in the past I lied to somebody, then I would want to judge myself as failing to meet those types of expectations that I would have for a more idealized version of myself. That would be what I would consider like a judgment, not necessarily like,
sure,
yeah, but I just want to make sure we're using the word in the same way. So yeah, you can tell me if that, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, so I think the problem is that the direction of the judgment and the idealized, what the target is, it can be based on bad stuff.
Okay.
Right? So you're right that judgment is a self-correcting. We have this part of our brain that does something called counterfactual thinking, which is, and it's kind of a weird term, but when we make a mistake, there is a factual representation of what happened. And we have a part of our brain that thinks in a counterfactual way. So you could think about it as hypothetical, but our brain goes back and rewrites history outside of the facts. And that is one of the ways that we learn from our mistakes and correct our behavior. So you're right that I think judgment is, it's a judgment that you place that has the direction towards an idealized self. But the problem is that that idealized self and that judgment can come from unhealthy places to begin with.
Yeah, definitely, I agree.
So what I'm saying is, that's what needs to be examined.
Okay. Then right. I guess the question would be, like, is the ideal that you're aspiring to unhealthy to some extent? I feel like that's what the...
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Yeah. And then we get to the big problem of, like, I think, like... So I think you've come up with a very intellectually sound, dharmic, ethical, utilitarian approach to what you want to do with your life. But that's all coming from up here. And what I'm really hearing you need to do is integrate that with like the other parts of your mind.
Yeah, of course.
Right? Because I think that's where you're going to find your balance. Because right now there's a conflict, which means that one side is going to win and one side is going to lose.
Or, well, ideally, one side is integrated into the other. If you run into a huge incongruence with the mind and the feeling, at some point you have to examine why and then bring one of them into alignment with the other at some point, right? Hopefully. Yeah,
so I think in that integration process, one piece is going to lose.
Okay. I disagree. Or let's talk about that, actually. Yeah, because I feel like I don't agree with that 100%. I'll give an example, and then you can talk me through why you think that. I'm curious. So let's say that... let's say that I feel like I should... shoot, I don't want to use like... Well, no, we'll say a negative thing, okay? Let's say that I want to play video games for 16 hours a day. But like intellectually, I know that it's probably not healthy to play video games for 16 hours a day. But I really like playing video games. So at some point, I ration this out to like, well, I think playing like 1 or 2 hours a day, maybe, that's healthy. Like I would view that as a sort of compromise where I don't know if I would say one side is lost or not, but maybe you would frame it as like one side is lost, like the emotional side of wanting to play for, yeah, go ahead, tell me.
Absolutely, right? Because one side of you wants to play for 16 hours a day.
But like maybe the intellectual side wants to play for like 0 hours a day, like don't play video games at all. But then you like compromise.
Sure. So both anytime you integrate or compromise, both sides lose.
Okay, that's
right.
Okay, sure. Okay, gotcha.
Right. So my point is that there's a different way, and I think it's fine. What you've done is awesome. Like I'm not trying to, I think like the higher you climb on the MMR scale, the harder things get, and the more subtle they become.
Sure. Okay.
So I think there's another way to go about this, which is to metabolize the root of why do I want to play 16 hours a day in the first place. It's not about reconciling two parts. It's about getting to the source of like, what does 16 hours a day mean to me? What's important about this?
Okay.
And then as you get down that road, something cool happens, which is that the desire kind of melts away. And then you're sort of left without either side. And then you're kind of like, you can just sort of make a choice and you're not being like driven by these two different things.
Sure. Can you expand on that when you say the desire melts away? Like, can you think your way through wanting to ever play video games? Yeah. What do you mean by that? Can you expand on that?
Theoretically, you can think your way through that. There is a subset of the practice of yoga. I'm not talking about the postures. I mean like the traditional meaning of the word yoga, which is like paths to enlightenment, called Jnana Yoga, which is the yoga of knowledge.
Okay.
So one major text of that is this text called the Brahma Sutra, which is like a text that talks about logical argument. So it's like a text on argument, basically. But there are, theoretically, it is possible. It's not logic, it's more contemplation. And then, like, if you kind of think about, so theoretically, maybe it's possible. It's something that when I was learning, I was taught that this is the hardest path of yoga, of which there are very, very few true yogis who like really know how to do this anymore. Because it's not logic, it's contemplation. But the other way that I would think about it is so first of all, does that answer your question, or what was your question?
What do you mean when you talk about like the dissolution of desire, I guess? I kind of thought it was going to be, I don't know if there was like when you just do this, but I've heard of like the far more complicated ones, right? Yeah, go ahead.
But there is absolutely a dissolution of desire. So like this is where things get kind of cool, which is like the more that you explore the origin of whatever your desires are, the more you will discover that there is nothing at the bottom.
Okay.
Right? So we assume that the things that we want are like real. But like once you realize the origin of the want, you realize that, oh, this is like not a real thing. It's just, so like just to give you a simple example, let's say I want to play a particular video game. So I've been on the fence about buying Starfield. Okay. Because I don't know, right? And so if I really look at, okay, do I want to buy the game? Do I not want to buy the game? I draw a logical argument about reasons to buy Starfield, reasons to not buy Starfield. And I can go back and forth, but the real antidote to that is like, why do I want Starfield in the first place? What am I looking for? And the more and more I go into myself, the more I realize, okay, like, what is the origin of my desire for Starfield? I saw an ad about it. What is the origin of my desire? I saw people talking about it. What is the origin of my desire? Oh, like I enjoyed playing Morrowind and Oblivion so much that I long for that experience again. And then as I sit down and I engage in some degree of like reflection and contemplation, okay, so like I've had things that I enjoyed in the past. Do I want to hold on to that? I don't need to. I can just appreciate that for what it is. And it's kind of weird, but at like the end of that process, there's just nothing there.
Is it necessarily good to dissolve all of your desires? I don't know how Buddhist we're getting, but like the counterclaim I'm going to say is like, well, what if you have a desire to be like a good father or a good parent? Like, would you want to drill down? Go ahead.
It depends on what your goal is. So when you say good, how are you defining that end zone?
Good, normatively, morally. Like, it sounds like dissolving a desire to partake in a vice is tautologically good because vices are bad. And if you can dissolve your desire to have a vice, you've done something good, right? We move away from vice and towards virtue. That's what I'm thinking good. You've made yourself a better person, improved your character, I guess.
So I'm going to say, a couple things. The first is that there's a subset of spiritual practitioners called Agori Babas. Okay. Gor means fear. Okay. Agor means lack of fear. Okay. So these are people who intentionally engage in vice-like behavior as part of their spiritual progression. Okay. Now, in this case, vice-like behavior includes marijuana, eating of meat, even cannibalism in some cases. Okay. And they actually intentionally expose themselves to negative things to try to transcend this like tautological idea of like good and bad. Okay. So they drink alcohol and get high and eat fish and meat and sleep in cemeteries and stuff like so. There's a spiritual path that kind of does that, but then the goal there is that this idea that this tautology between good and bad is actually like a human construction, and that it's not a real thing. That it's kind of this non-dualism, which is like a philosophical view that most of the yoga practitioners kind of take. It's the dominant school that has emerged historically. Okay. So first thing is that there's a perspective that tautologically good and bad is not a real thing, and it's just these are judgments that we make, right? And we know that good and bad changes over time because people used to think something is good, now they think it's bad. Okay. So what's really good or bad? Sure. Second thing is, from a more practical perspective, I think that for 99% of people, moving on this path will improve their life in a significant way. But if you really look at the precision of it, abandoning desire makes you not a good citizen in the world of life. So if your goal is to break free of the cycle of suffering and to become enlightened and achieve whatever your highest human potential is, which can be viewed as virtuous, and there's a whole fun angle there, right? So like, but as you become more and more enlightened, like you don't behave the way that a normal person will. Generally speaking, I think that, like I said, for 99% of the times, that's good. But let's remember that like when Buddha started his journey on his enlightenment and also became enlightened, he basically abandoned his wife and child and kingdom and pursued something else. I think most people don't get there.
Sure.
But technically, if you want to really get to it, like you could say, okay, so there are yogis in the Himalayas who have been meditating in caves for 40 years. What good are they doing in the world? Who knows?
Okay.
That's my answer. I don't know if that answers your question.
What was this originally about? What it means to dissolve your desires? Okay. It was good enough. Okay.
Is that good?
Gotcha.
Right. So I think it will lead to less suffering. But the interesting thing, the reason people get scared about it is because as we dissolve our desires, we also lose some things that give us a compass in life, like ambition.
Sure. I think I probably would agree with that. That like people reframe a lot of things negatively that are probably actually important parts of society. So for instance, like feeling negative when your peers judge you, or feeling competitive or a pressure to do something socially is probably an important part of the human experience in terms of like building societies, because we want to feel like we can pressure people to act in certain ways, stuff like that, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think one of the biggest mistakes we make in our society is that assuming that negative emotions are bad. Like there's a reason why every human being feels anger, feels shame, feels guilt. And it's fascinating because as people move away from their negative emotions, that's actually when they get stuck. Because if you kind of think about it, like I did a YouTube video about this, but it's a fascinating concept that like everyone avoids shame, but shame is the most powerful corrective motivating force in you as a human being. And so when you start suppressing shame, you literally neuroscientifically lose out on the ability to learn from mistakes and adapt to circumstances.
Yeah, I agree. There's a quote that I had when I was a StarCraft 2 player 13 years ago, but the quote was like, to achieve perfection is to sacrifice growth. And the idea is that like if you don't feel an impetus to change or to improve or do something, then you've essentially like cut yourself off from any motivating forces to actually change or be better. So yeah, I think I would agree with that.
So the interesting thing is that as you dissolve more desires, you become more free, and you can end up choosing to act compassionately, which is usually what happens.
That's good.
So I think getting rid of ambition is only scary until you discover that there are other compasses, and most people want the compass instead of ambition, because ambition is like relentless. And it kind of drives you as opposed to you controlling it.
I feel like...
And the freedom... The freedom to choose is liberating. And oftentimes when people are truly free to choose, they make the right choices.
Okay. My second monitor is here, so I'm looking at you, but it looks like I'm not looking at you. But just so you know, you're right there. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Did you want to walk down this road anymore? Or do you want to move to another area, or?
Well, did I answer your question?
Something that would... This is very difficult for me. I think something that would help push me along a little bit. It's very hard for me to find role models since my job and everything I do is like so unique. It's really hard to find people in the world that I would go like, oh, this guy's doing something, I want to be more like him. I think that when you give me this kind of overarching like dissolution of desires, the freedom to choose better paths, oftentimes the path that you choose post dissolution will be better than the more hardline road you run prior to that. It would be interesting if there were people that I could look at that were achieving or accomplishing in my arena those types of things that had made those decisions. Does that make sense? So for instance, something you're telling me is the ambition driver, the ambition engine might feel good because it pushes and pushes and pushes, but that if you could dissolve everything underneath that and then make other choices, it might be better. But I mean, obviously, intellectually and emotionally, I'm very tied to that ambition engine. And it's hard for me to, I'm hearing what you're saying, but there's a lot of disbelief without me being able to find somebody in the world and go like, oh, that person did that. And I see they're doing, like, I aspire to that. I want to aspire to that. So it would push me in that direction. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, but so do you? I'm getting kind of this tacit idea that I need someone to not need, but if I set a role model for myself, it helps motivate my behavior.
It could, or like if there's a particular habit that's good, I like to see the proof of concept of that, I guess. So like if somebody tells me something like, oh, like you met me a year ago and I told you that I was going to read, one book a week. And then they talked to me about, the 52 different books they read last year, just because they found some like novel way to work reading into their schedule. Like maybe they read like 2 pages after every League of Legends game. If I see that, then in my life, I'd be like, holy crap, this guy has a really good outcome. He had a really cool process for doing it. I'm going to copy that. That's kind of what I'm thinking. Yeah. So when you talk to me about the dissolution thing, I'd be curious. To see. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know who you would consider a good role model. I don't think that. So the only thing that comes to my mind is my own experience with my own journey.
Okay.
But I don't think that I am an appropriate role model for you. I think we're colleagues, and I'm happy to share what that experience looked like for me. And the reason that I'm advocating for it is because I think it has been profoundly positive in my life.
Okay. Can you actually, so then I'm kind of curious, for however much you're obviously comfortable sharing, you have, from everything that I've seen, you've got an awesome family, you've got an awesome like company, and you do really cool stuff online. How do you balance out, how do you balance it? What's the emotional decision? Somebody comes to you with an offer or an ability to expand your business, twofold. You've got an opportunity to do this, but it might come at like significant cost to your family. What does the process look like for you? How do you even begin to have that internal dialogue? Yeah, what is that? Yeah.
Yes. So I can share my own experience. So to begin with, like I wanted to be big when I was growing up. Like I wanted to be an important person. I grew up Indian. An Indian diaspora in the United States means that you've got a couple of career choices.
Yeah.
There's a very strong founder effect. So there's like serious brain drain. So all the Indian kids. So I grew up in a city where there were 5 people my age in the whole city. There were 5 Indian people in my grade in the whole city. 3 of us became doctors, right? So that's like, it's just staggering. So I grew up with this culture that was very like education focused, achievement focused, not tiger parents, but that's just kind of the culture. Like my parents were very loving and supportive. And so I grew up in like, when I was 15 or 16, I told people I wanted to be a doctor, and they got impressed with that because, Alok is such a smart boy, right? And then that fed my ego. And then when I went to UT, I was a freshman and I majored in pre-med, and I was like, I'm going to be at the top of my class. And where did I want to go to med school? I wanted to go to med school at Harvard because that's where all the Indian kids want to go. And so when that ambition was my primary driving force, I found that it could not conquer the other parts of myself, because there was a part of me that wanted to play for 16 hours a day. And so those 2 parts would fight. And because of whatever, on some days I would study and on some days I wouldn't. And certainly not good enough to get into any medical school for that matter. So that changed when I went to India, and I sort of discovered a different way of like looking at myself and like understanding like where my ambition comes from.
Can you real quick, how old were you when you went to India?
21.
Okay, cool. Okay, go ahead.
And then, so I then decided to become a monk, but that too was like actually the same driving forces. What I later discovered is that I had concluded logically that like I can't compete with these kids. Like there's no way I'm going to be able to achieve my goals and what I want, and I'm basically a failure at life. So what I did is I did this really interesting ego trick where I started devaluing that which I could not have.
Okay.
right? So, oh, like all these kids are materialistic and they're shallow and they all want to, make lots of money and drive fancy cars and things like that. I'm going to rise above that and become spiritual.
Sure.
So I'm going to have this ego. Huh?
I was going to say that's super common, yeah, that when somebody can't have something, they start to say, well, actually, that sucks anyway, and this has been way better, and blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
Right. So I kind of went down that road, and then thankfully my teachers recognized that my desire to become a monk was not like genuine. It was escapism. So they didn't take me, but they continued teaching me. And then, the big irony is at some point I gave up on my dreams. Right? I was like, there's no fucking way. I graduated with a 2.5 GPA, applied to med school for 2 years, got 110 rejections. 80 something rejections. Applied my third year, got another 20, 30, 40 rejections. And at that point, after my second year, I had kind of this formative moment where I started thinking about, okay, like, what do I want? And then I changed the way that I started looking. It's not about desire or anything like that. Like, I kind of let go of all that stuff. And I was like, my teachers told me to do something, so I'm going to do it out of like faith, not out of personal desire or ambition or anything like that. I trust these people, and they said do this, so I'm going to do this.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Else told, yeah.
So you coming from the U.S. and you being really ambitious, and then you kind of like changing your ambitions to different things. Why were you in a state where you would trust those teachers? Or what do you think made it that you were like, you know what, I'm going to put aside my ego a little bit and trust these guys instead of just like, you know what, screw these guys, they're dumb. I'm going to go back and follow my own stuff.
So I would say that if you are a GSL champion in StarCraft and you queue up against someone who just installed the game, this is what my interactions with them were like. Okay. They just crushed. I mean, it wasn't competitive, but they just bodied me every single time. They understood so much about me that I did not understand, and they taught me all of that stuff about myself.
Okay, so they basically they'd earn the respect with just the knowledge.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, right. So they like helped me understand like how to live, like these fundamentals, because we don't teach that. We don't teach people how their mind works. And then the other cool thing is they never asked me to have faith or trust in them. My teachers were good. They also recognized that what I needed was questions, not answers. They also did a good job of answering whatever questions I had, which in many spiritual traditions is like not very good. So it didn't matter how hard the question was that I asked. They like basically always had a good answer.
Okay.
And so based on that, I was like, okay, these people know what they're talking about. And I think there's a lot of legitimacy to this. I also, in that process, started to trust more into it because I started looking into the science. I was very skeptical of all this meditation stuff when I started. I didn't believe it. I thought it was all BS. Okay. And then I got my first research position studying complementary alternative medicine, and that was a very formative experience for me too. Okay. This is a roundabout way of saying, like, as I gave up on my ambitions and just focused on, let's call it being a better person or accomplishing whatever, like a different kind of internal compass, I actually floated to the top of like the competitive pool. Okay. And then my ambitions re-emerged when I actually started. So I did medical school at Tufts, and then I matched at psychiatry at Harvard and Mass General and McLean, which are like the best programs in the country. I'm sure other people will disagree. UCLA is really good. Stanford's really good. Yale is really good. Hopkins is really good. A lot of great programs, but based on the academic status ladder or whatever, those were the top programs in the country. Okay. And so I kind of found myself there. And then one thing that I quickly realized is I'm not like these people. So I remember like being in the line to get coffee at 4 p.m. with a fellow intern of mine. And he was an internal medicine intern. And man, like I was just talking to him about like medicine, and like what he knew was just mind boggling. Like he was just so brilliant. And that was my experience there, is that people here are just like absurdly brilliant. Okay. And I didn't even have imposter syndrome. I think I would have had imposter syndrome if I didn't understand how to do this stuff with my mind. So I was like, all right, I ended up here anyway. So like, even if I don't belong, whatever. And then I actually like, once again, sort of leaned in on a different kind of compass of, okay, what do I want? And then my desires started emerging again, because I started to get prominence. I started to achieve things there. I started to float to the top in some places. Even in those institutions. And then I started to get ambitious. And then I started a private practice, and I had people coming to my office for my help who were CEOs of major companies and billionaires and things like that. And I was like, all right, this is what the goal is, right? It's to like become an expert, become the best in the world at something, and have people come to your office and pay you, or companies pay you piles of money to go out there and share your wisdom, which is like exactly what I wanted to do. And then I sort of realized a little bit after that this is silly. Like, this is the same stupid ambition. And that there's actually a class of people out there that need help just as much or even more, who no one is helping. No one is even listening to. No one is even talking to. And those are degenerates on Twitch.
Yeah. Okay. Before we move here, can I ask you a challenging question? I'm curious.
Yeah.
So my interactions with you are fairly limited, but I've seen a lot of your stuff. We've spoken a lot. My perception of you is you're an incredibly intelligent individual. I'm sure part of that has been through your upbringing. Part of that is probably your parents are probably smart. I'm sure there's a mixture there. Do you think that you went through the path that you did, and rather than kind of like gunning for the top and being ultra ambitious and being obsessed with the prestige, you did a lot of work to kind of like discover or build yourself up as a character, and then the other stuff kind of came as a byproduct of that self-improvement, that mental like self-improvement? Do you think that the same process would work to make most people successful if they weren't exceptionally bright or intelligent? So say you take a kid.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay, yeah. You think so?
I mean, give me your example.
Yeah, I was going to say you take a kid who, drops at a high, I'm giving you an extreme one, but 16, 17, reads at a, fourth or fifth grade reading level, not very bright, doesn't have very many interests or hobbies. And this kid's like, you know what, I'm going to go discover myself mentally. Do you think that this person would benefit in the same way that you did from that type of, mental self-discovery?
I do not think anything is 100%, but I feel 100% confident in that strategy. And here's why.
Okay.
So what do you think I gained in that process? So if I have a character sheet, what do you think that got me? Do you think it got me XP? Do you think it got me skill proficiencies? Like, how do you conceptualize what I went through? Because you're saying, like, what I'm hearing you say is like, okay, is it predicated on your inborn talent? We'll get to that in a second.
Sure.
That's kind of what I'm hearing your question as.
A little bit, yeah. The way that I would frame it is, or the way that I would see it is, we kind of, I think as we grow up in a society, you've been like to bumper bowling, I imagine, right? Do you know what bumper bowling is? Never mind. I'm so sorry. But like a lot of people have kind of like different rails or different restrictions on them. It's where you go bowling, but instead of gutters, they've got bumpers there for like 4-year-olds, so you can't go in the gutter basically. Yeah. Not relevant. But that you grow up, you've got a lot of restrictions. You've got to kind of you get a lot of thought patterns from society. You get a lot of like direction from people around you, and I guess going to a different environment with these guys allowed you to kind of like shed a lot of those societal expectations, a lot of those dispositions you had, and just let you really explore and build and work on yourself. And then once you kind of like fully fleshed out and understanding yourself, you're able to re-engage with society and then explore those things. That would be,
perfect, right? Okay. So now my question to you is, so like we all go through life with the instrument of our body, our mind, and I'm going to toss this word out there because I think it's complete and we can talk about this if you want to, and our soul. Okay? So we go through the world always with us. Like when you're playing a first person game here, and you can't ever zoom out of it. Like you're you. And so what I learned in India, and why I think it doesn't matter what your IQ is, and I've got evidence of sorts, but we'll talk about that in a second, is that all I learned was how I work. Okay. So it's like, if you don't know how a keyboard works, how effective are you going to be at typing? If you are blind to a keyboard, if you are numb to your internal environment. And there are studies that show that there's 6 or 7 neuroscientific deficits that lead to addiction. Okay. And one of them is a lack of awareness of your internal environment. And what this clinically looks like is someone will say, I don't know what happened. I slipped up. No, there's a whole series of subconscious stressors, pressures, willpower degradation, lack of sleep. There's 1,000 things that are going on, which is responsible for your behavior on this particular day. We're just blind to it.
Sure.
So I think that, anytime we're numb or blind to, and think about this for a second. If I am numb or blind to the driving forces, which doesn't mean they stop driving. It just means I'm not aware of them.
Yeah.
Right? And then what happens is actually exactly what you did with this conversation, which is I have this conflict between these two things, and I'm not trying to shit on you here. But it's a great example. I have a conflict between these two things, and what is the logical answer? But the real answer that I'm offering, because this is my perspective, it's my bias, it's my experience, is that if you understand the origin of those two perspectives, it's not about which one is right, it's about where does this come from? And that has very real utility. And this is where, if we want to talk about evidence, so like from an anecdotal perspective, this is what I advocate for people like my patients and my clients and things like that. It's what I advocate to my kids. And I think that those people tend to be pretty happy. They tend to have good outcomes. Sometimes those outcomes are scary, like makes me wonder whether I'm making a mistake, and I've sought supervision around that. So for example, like 30% of people who come into my office within 12 to 18 months will change their job.
Okay.
And so I started getting scared about, like, am I biasing these people and pushing these people to make a change? Because that shouldn't be happening. And then what I sort of ended up concluding is that as we start this process, what people realize is that they start shedding their conditioning or their socialization or living a life of shoulds and start gravitating towards what they want. They start changing their jobs.
Okay.
And they tend to be like predominantly happy after that process, and oftentimes paradoxically even more successful.
Okay.
And then there's also, I mean, if you look at, now we can talk about real evidence, because my anecdotal experience ain't worth much, honestly. We look at it scientifically.
Okay.
We look at real evidence. We can look at studies on mindfulness, on meditation, on developing narrative, on healing trauma. And there isn't, I haven't seen, any evidence, I mean, maybe that it's out there, but that this only works for people who are very talented. In fact, the whole point of mindfulness and the reason that we have it as an evidence-based intervention as a part of psychotherapy is it works for people on the autism spectrum. It works for people with Down syndrome. It works for people with low IQ, high IQ, men, women, old, young. It works for everybody because it's a fundamental facet of like our wiring, and it's how our brain works. And when we strengthen our frontal lobes, it helps us with impulse control. Right? That's like a neuroscientific fact. So I don't think that, I mean, I'm happy to be challenged. I think it's a great question, but I don't think it's specific to me.
Okay. Yeah, no, I was just curious what your answer would be. I think I probably agree. I think if you take a person that is underachieving in school and then they become more introspective, self-reflective, and get a greater understanding of themselves, it's harder to imagine, or it's hard to imagine that their life doesn't also significantly improve in other ways. Because my guess would probably be that those people that are in those bad situations are probably more inhibited than an average person when it comes to those introspective things. So opening that up would help them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, sure.
That's a brilliant assumption that you're making, because that's like literally that's what happened in my case, what we see a lot, right? So the worse your situation is, if we think about what is the effect on a human being of a bad situation, it hurts. And then our instinctive response when something hurts is to numb it.
Sure.
Because we haven't been taught how to fix it. So then we ignore it. And then what we actually see is people in bad situations are more introspectively blind. Let me think about that. I don't think that's an evidence-based statement, but that's my opinion.
Sure. I can imagine it being the case that depending on the negative situations you grow up in, you examine negative behavior, it becomes normalized, and then you unleash that behavior into the world, and you lose the ability to even analyze introspectively if it's good or bad in the way, because it's just what you've always seen or something like that. Yeah. Sure. Okay. Yeah,
I mean, I think it's worked for me. Now, I think there's also like a couple things to notice. I mean, the path that I'm on is financially less than the path that I used to be on, right? So there are costs. And then in terms of how do I navigate that, I really think about what's the point of money? And, it's not a way of keeping score. I mean, sure, like I could buy more stuff, but like, I don't, I mean, I'm a degenerate gamer. Like, what do I need money for?
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Right. So like some amount of security and stuff is really important. Right. So, and that's also where, when I sort of think about it, like being freed of my internal drivers, I can kind of make a logical decision about how much do I want to do for free. So even if you look at like the pricing in my private practice, there was one point where There was at one point 50 to 70% of my patients were free care, and it was my financial situation was fine because I charged enough to the other 30 to 50%. And I had a uniform financial policy, which was, this is what my rate is, pay what you can.
Okay.
So I think some of those kind of, the dust kind of settles. I don't know how, like once you're internally, like your compass is set, then you sort of like can logically think through stuff and it kind of settles.
Okay, that makes sense. I think I have like a similar idea. I don't know how well I follow it, but I have a similar idea kind of to what you're saying. I think in the business world, have you ever heard the term like first principles?
I've heard the term. I don't know what it means.
Just basically like what are you orienting yourself towards? Like, what are you about? Like, what are you trying to do? And what you're saying is like, anytime somebody would come like for advice, like, I don't know, where do I want to go to college? What do I want to do for a job? Blah, blah, blah. Kind of like what you're saying, like those questions are never really important. The important question is like, well, what do you want to accomplish or who do you want to be in like 5 or 10 years or whatever? And then once you have like those like very fundamental questions figured out, all of the other questions become pretty simple. So I think kind of what you're saying about like figuring out kind of like the internal area of like what does it mean to take a pill or where does self-judgment come from or anything like that. Then if I've like figured out those types of things, then the questions about like medication or whatever, not really difficult questions at all. They kind of fall into line very simply.
Yeah, and I think that's so there's like scientific support of that. So like even so part of the reason I started a coaching program was because I thought that there's some of these things, like coming down to first principles, were not emphasized in the mental health space. So just one example of that is the number one variable that correlates with vulnerability to pornography addiction is meaninglessness in life.
Okay.
So, but if we sort of think about it, we actually have evidence-based approaches to cultivate purpose and meaning and direction, which are all introspective.
Okay.
But, and so what happens if you look at the literature on positive psychology, when you cultivate introspection, the rest of the stuff falls into place. And the whole reason behind purpose, and this is why we teach so much about dharma or dharma, right, is once you have that North Star, then stuff starts to fall in place.
Okay.
And the more important thing is that, and then we see these scientific benefits, which is that even though we're not treating pornography addiction, you just have to have a reason to not watch pornography. Like you have to have something in your life that is guiding you, pushing you. Because what happens with pornography addiction or video game addiction is it just fills up the empty space in your life and it drags you down.
Sure. I think there's a lot of antisocial behavior that falls into this. Like when you ask like a prep school kid, like what did you have to do in your life to not commit armed robbery? They don't really have an answer because they were going to school in the morning for band practice. They were doing football practice after school. Their mom and dad picked them up. They were like, there's not even a question of why you would do that because that kind of like thing in your life is filled by so many other things. So that just seems to track from what I understand.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did we get to your original concern about, do you want to talk more about stimulants and kind of outcomes and what to expect and how to think about it?
Sure. I have one more big question on that if you want to,
sure.
And then you can go from wherever. Yeah. Another thing that's difficult for me. Okay. We're changing gears significantly. Okay. So, pre versus post taking some kind of like mind altering medication. Something that's very difficult for me is how do you figure out what is a positive effect of a drug that's helping you live a better life versus what's just like you being high and like having a good time. So some real examples I'll give of this is there's a lot of things that seem to overlap in terms of like getting high and then also like not having ADHD. So I don't know how many of these things are true, but I've read something that like if you sometimes overeating can be like a factor when it comes to ADHD people, that if you have like a bag of cookies, every time you walk by, you want to grab one, even if you're not necessarily hungry. And then I noticed that like if I've had amphetamines, I can have anything in the house and I just won't eat it because I'm not tempted to. But like, am I actually making a better choice to not do that? Or am I just too high to want to eat? And there's a lot of, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Neither.
Okay.
So let's understand the neuroscientific mechanism behind why you eat cookies when you have ADHD.
Yeah. Okay. Go for it.
This is generality. This is great. This is like a med school question. So let's understand this, right? So why do you eat cookies if you're not hungry? So people with ADHD are impulsive, which means that they engage in impulsive behavior. So if you look at like even the packaging on a cookie, the packaging on a cookie is designed to evoke an impulse. So you have, I'm not saying corporations are evil or anything like that, but it's not my area of expertise. But we all know that corporations cookie companies design packages to evoke impulses. And then you have a brain that is vulnerable to impulses in a way that is, so normally what happens in the brain is we have all kinds of integration of signals. Okay? So you have, for example, like a glucagon level, and a leptin level, and a ghrelin level. And all of these like levels, insulin, glucagon, leptin, and ghrelin, are all in some fucking tango to tell you when to eat a cookie. Okay? So what happens in the case of ADHD is it's kind of like an impulsive behavior. Since it's around and there's an environmental trigger and a sensory input before you even realize what you're doing, and you don't even realize it's not a conscious choice, it's just like an impulse that you give into because your capacity to restrain impulses is low. So this is why, for example, like, people with ADHD benefit from clean areas, because what you really want to do is extend. So the key thing about impulses is, let me just think about how to say this.
Yeah, sure.
So if you're someone with ADHD and you're struggling with impulsive behavior, the main thing that you need to understand is that the impulse is not sustained. It's an impulse. So what you really need to do, if you get distracted, is you need to ride out the impulse.
Okay.
So what's happening, the reason people in our society are getting fucked right now by ADHD is because our society is greasing the wheels for impulsive behavior. So this used to have a lock code, and now it has a thumbprint. Now it has Face ID. So if an impulse lasts half a second, I can pick up the phone. And the phone remembers which website. Now I have a notification too. So I have an impulse for 1 second. And in that second, what can happen? I can look at the phone. The phone auto unlocks. I don't even have to try to unlock it. I just have to point the phone at my face. And then it auto unlocks. I see a notification. I click on the impulse. There go 30 minutes. So what happens with stimulant medication is we are restraining the impulsiveness.
Okay.
Which I don't think that you weren't making conscious decisions in either case, right? Your brain is processing that a cookie is there. It just, the impulse is controlled by whatever other directed behavior you have.
Gotcha. Okay. It's hard to, emotionally, it's hard to process that. But I mean, intellectually, it makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. So what makes it hard for you to emotionally process that? This is great. Things are coming full circle. Well, because intellectually, everything you're saying makes sense. I feel like as people, I think we tend to think of ourselves as being more cognitive than we actually are. So things like impulses don't like fit into our cognitive understandings of ourselves. Like, why would I do something on an impulse? I'm choosing to do every single thing I'm doing. So the idea that like now I'm not making a really bad choice, but it's not a choice, it's just an impulse that I'm not acting on. That's like, it's just a hard thing to emotionally intuit for me, I guess. Yeah. Did that make sense?
Yeah. So,
okay.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, but I think so let me tell you what I heard.
Sure.
Okay. You said, am I not eating because I'm high?
Yeah.
Versus the ADHD. So like, what is the emotional valence of each of those options? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, it's full circling back to the original question of I guess of like the character question, kind of, or am I where? So
let's say one of those things is true. How do you feel about yourself?
Yeah, there's a different judgment. Like, if I'm not
absolutely
eating, yeah, exactly, yeah. If I'm not eating,
in both cases, it's a negative judgment.
Well, yeah,
you see that? Because on the one hand, oh fuck, right? Fucking Steven is taking his fucking high pills, and sure, he's not eating cookies, which would be progress. But why aren't we eating cookies? Because we're fucking high.
Well, there's one.
You
so
see
like
that?
yeah, I understand what you're saying. I slightly disagree, but I understand what you're saying. The difference here is I think I largely have kind of sort of made peace with myself in terms of like taking the drug, but the rationalization in my mind is that like I think taking the drug is okay as long as I'm elevating myself to just a baseline level of impulse control. So if it is the case that I'm doing the medication appropriately and I'm at a baseline level of impulse control and I'm not doing this, that's good. But if I'm like overshooting and I'm just like abusing drugs, that's the bad part. Yeah, go ahead.
Right. So, but what I'm saying is, like, think about, like, so this is the study is rigged. Like, I know that you've reconciled it. That's fine. But what I'm saying is this shit is still lurking because when you gave me, okay, you gave me two options, right? Option number one is like, I've got ADHD and that's why I'm eating cookies.
Sure.
And option number two is I stopped eating cookies. But why does your mind generate such a judgmental hypothesis for option two?
Well, if it's because I'm just super high, then it's just because I'm abusing drugs to shortcut like the growth in character that I should have to stop.
But do you see how, like, out of the 1,000 things that you could have said, there's a differential diagnosis. There are 1,000 hypotheses why you're not eating the cookies. Which one does your mind settle on?
Well, obviously the drug, right?
Right. So that's coming from you. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, that thing is still active.
Well, but I mean, I am doing it because like that's a part of my reality, right?
Yeah, but I mean, but that's what I'm kind of saying is you're doing it and you've reconciled on an intellectual level, but that part of you that is frustrated with yourself for being weak, which, by the way, is, if I had to bet money, right? So this is the most common thing if you look at research on this. People with ADHD have harsh self-judgments. And so the way that the self-judgment manifests in your mind is by it's like a study bias. Like, the options that it generates for you are rigged. The reason, am I too high to? No, you're not too high. I mean, I don't think so. Right. So we also know, for example, that stimulant medication suppresses appetite. One of the major concerns about giving it to kids is that it can interfere with like things like growth and stuff like that. Yeah. Which thankfully it's not too bad. But you know, there could be a neuroscientific, but I wouldn't characterize it as high. But that's what I mean is like you pick such a judgmental characterization as an option, which I think is significant.
Sure. I guess it's just because that's the thing I'm trying to avoid, because I know that taking said medication is going to improve my life in these ways. But like, if it's too much, it's probably, yeah. Does that make sense?
Right. So the things that you're anxious or worried about, right? That's that emotional energy. And when you say it's a brilliant insight that this is emotionally not sitting with me. And then the question is why? It's because you're emotionally in the opposite direction.
Well, like, let's say, so hypothetically, let's say let's say that I fix this, okay? What's to prevent me from saying, okay, so like here, talk me down from this one. And I'm not saying I'm doing this, and this is all hypothetical. Sorry, I'm not asking for medication advice, but like, let's say theoretically that like I solve all these issues, I figure this out. You're like, I don't have any negative judgments whatsoever. You know, forget these things. I'm just going to do 100 milligrams of methamphetamine every day because I have no judgments about this anymore. It improves my life in all these different ways. I'm doing so better here. Like, what's the back away from the cliff there? As opposed to right now where you're saying I'm probably too far in the other direction of being too judgmental. Like, how would you, what's the balance here? Yeah.
So I would say it's just like any other medication.
Okay.
Right. So like you would have a relationship with your stimulant, the same that you do with, like, let's say a cholesterol medication.
Oh, I super disagree with
or
this.
An antibiotic.
Rationalize this for me because I have a hard time figuring this one out. In my mind, I have like behavioral modifying medication that works in your brain. I separate that way differently than like insulin.
Right, but hold on a second, because what was the premise that we started with? That we dissolved this stuff, right?
Okay.
So when we dissolve that stuff, it's behavior modifying. So what? There's no emotional energy behind that. I need this medication in the same way that I need cholesterol medication. There's no judgment or attachment to it.
I feel like the difference is that like I can't do anything mentally about like my triglycerol levels or triglycerol levels. I can't do anything mentally about my HDL or LDL. Like I can't think these problems away. Yeah. So that the medication there is way.
Do you see that's your hypothetical is flawed.
Okay.
Because you're injecting your judgment into the hypothetical. Because look when I tell you, then it becomes just like any, if we don't attach any judgments to stimulants, if we've dissolved that judgment, we don't no longer judge things. Then what happens is then it's just like any other medication. That's like you follow that logically.
I mean, I follow logically what you're saying, but it feels like it doesn't. So like, for instance, I could have a day where I'm very focused and I could do everything I could do on my ADHD medication like normally, but I couldn't have a day where I don't take my insulin as a type 1 diabetic, right? That one of those worlds is possible, one of them is not. I view those things differently.
Right, but and the reason that you are So let me give you a different example, okay? So let's say like cholesterol medication.
Sure.
Now, there are people who can get really upset about their cholesterol medication and having to take it every day. Can you imagine that?
No, I've got a family of diabetics, and sometimes they don't even take their insulin. So yeah, I'm very aware of that. I could believe that.
So like people are like, like, oh, like I should be able to do this through diet.
Oh, that kind of
Like
stuff. Okay,
their
sure.
body image issues. This is the psychodynamics of psychopharmacology. We have all kinds of attachment to a particular pill. And what you're saying is this pill, I can understand how you would not have an attachment to, but this other pill logically has attachments for these reasons. No, bro, it's not logical. It's emotional. It's based on your attachment to that particular pill and what that pill means to you. It's not because of it's not because of the physiologic thing. That's just what your mind says. Right? Because what you're worried about, and this is true of all medication, is like, this is the part of my body that's weak.
Yeah, but I feel like I feel like we don't view our brains as our bodies. I think that's like the fundamental difference here. Like if my heart isn't doing something, I take a medication for my heart. If my lungs, if my kidneys, I take a medication. But you don't view yourself as your brain. That's like you, right? I feel that's the difference. Go ahead.
Yeah, so, but I mean, when you say we, who is in that we?
Well, I was speaking we as in humans in general. I think we view ourselves as being our brain rather than like our brain as an organ in our body that we can medicate.
Do you view yourself that way?
I probably do. And yeah, as
right. So I think this is where like, cause I'm telling you, man, I've worked with plenty of people who do not identify with their brain and identify with their body more.
That's really interesting.
Right?
I almost don't believe that. That's crazy. Yeah. But okay, that's really interesting to me. Yeah, okay.
Right? So like you can take anyone with body image issues. Okay. Who I am is determined. This could also be because you're a dude and I'm a dude. So like we don't get judged as harshly on average. I'm not saying that we don't get judged, and this is balancing out. Right? So like it used to be that women had body image issues way more than men do. And when I work with women who have body image issues, they like, a lot of who they are is tied up to their body. And working with, and that's not just one reason for that. I mean, that's evening out, by the way, I think with social media. But then there's like other things that biologically women go through that men don't have an equivalent, like pregnancy and childbirth. So when you go through pregnancy, it makes permanent alterations of your diabetes, your fat distribution. The change to breast tissue is profound, right? Like when they swell and you've got all this stuff, like, I mean, so like there's definitely people can identify with the body. I think you're quite intellectual. And I think that you would be afraid, you would fear losing a chunk of your brain way more than you would fear losing a piece of your hand.
Yeah, of course.
Right? But if I'm a professional wrestler, like it could be the other way around.
Interesting.
So I think the key thing here is your attachment to it, which is the problem. That's my point. And so the problem here is that once you dissolve that attachment, the conclusion that you assume disappears, because the reason you infer that is because of your attachment to your brain over your body. I don't know if I lost you there, but
a little bit, or not you lost me a little bit, but I follow you a little bit, or I guess that would mean I did lose a little bit. You're in your world, like the brain and the body, and then like the spirit or the soul or whatever. These things exist all kind of differently from one another, and medicating your heart or medicating your liver or medicating your brain are all essentially the same thing. But I'm coming in with a normative judgment that loads brain medication differently, so all of my questions are kind of fundamentally poisoned as soon as I ask the question. Right?
Exactly, right? Because I say then it becomes just like a cholesterol medication, and what's your response? You say, no, it doesn't. And then I ask you, why is it different? And then you're like, well, because my brain is different from body. And I'm like, well, hold on a second. That is where you're inserting your judgment. Right? So if we're really presuming that you've metabolized this stuff, then it does become that. And I've seen that process many times, by the way. Right. So like when you work with the psychodynamics of psychopharmacology, people like taking their SSRI or their antidepressant medication. There's all kinds of psychotherapy that you have to do around that. What does it mean to take, I'm dependent on this medication for my fundamental happiness in life. Oh my God, I don't want to take happy pills. Like this isn't like ADHD where we know that the brain is different. Like this is just depression.
Sure.
Right. With ADHD, these people are neurodivergent. Their brain is wired differently. But me, I was fine for the first 25 years of my life, and then something happened and I became weak. Right?
Okay.
Even those people will say ADHD medication is okay, but depression medication isn't.
Okay.
So it all has to do with your attachment to by attachment, I'm using it in an Eastern sense, like the meaning that you associate with that thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And what I'm hearing through and through is that you associate a lot of meaning, and you adapted beautifully and cognitively reframed beautifully, and whoever's prescribing the shit did a great job.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because you're taking it, sounds like you're adherent, you're doing all this other stuff. And by the way, there's a very simple answer to your question of like, how do I know? I think you asked a question, something about...
I see a lot of really
I'll
positive
get to
outcomes, and I don't know, like, is this like the medication is working and now Stephen Bunnell, I'm making good choices, or am I just really high and now like I can do problem solving really?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's where from like if I'm teaching a med student class, like there's a really simple answer to that. That's why we have like measurable scientific validated instruments.
What do you mean by that?
Right.
ADHD,
So when
yeah.
So like for example, we will track symptoms.
Okay.
So how do we know if it's the medication that's working or you're making good choices? Well, first of all, you have to remember that making good choices is a complex neuroscientific process, which the medication working it helps people make good choices. That's literally what the medication does, right? It corrects whatever weaknesses or supplements whatever weaknesses there are in the brain that prevent these people from making good choices.
Sure.
Now, there's a whole complicated thing there. So some people will consider ADHD medication to be like glasses. It doesn't fix the problem, but as long as your glasses are on, your eyesight is normal. I think it's a good analogy.
Okay.
But I think there's all kinds of problems with that perspective. So, and if you look at the data on ADHD medication, there's some data that shows that the effect lingers for 3 to 6 months after you stop the medication. So there are other things going on with taking the medication.
Yeah.
That could have to do with things like developing healthy habits.
Yeah, that's what a big thing. Yeah, that I read. Yeah.
Right. So, and that's because the habits, I mean, the neurotransmitters for the habit circuitry and the location in the brain are completely different. The real tragedy in ADHD is that since you are impulsive, you never get the ability to develop habits.
Yeah.
Which is a real tragedy because the one thing that can protect you against your ADHD is the endocannabinoid system that is habits.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Other questions?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Anything else? Yeah.
I wanted to just share one or two things.
Yeah, whatever you want. Yeah.
So when people think about ADHD, like I just wanted to like share how I understand what is effective about ADHD medication, what it does and what it doesn't do.
Okay.
So if we look at ADHD medication, we have to understand that the problems that people with ADHD have come from two places.
Okay.
They come from the neurodivergence of the brain, let's just call it that, and they come from living a life with neurodivergence. So there are these social impacts that come from basically having untreated or undiagnosed ADHD. So, my favorite statistic about this is that oftentimes people won't have friends. So like kids with ADHD, by the time they hit the second grade, they stop getting invited to birthday parties. So they have difficulty socializing, because they can't function well in school, their academic achievement goes down. This is why there is a causative impact in terms of depression later in life. It also creates the things that, I kind of see with a lot of people, which is a lot of harsh self-judgment. A lot of, I should be able to do this. This medical illness is different from all the other medical illnesses. And let me give you all the logical reasons why, right? You can't directly interact with your heart. You can't directly lower your triglycerides level. By the way, you can. But that's a conversation for a different day.
When I said do it, I mean like think it down. That's what I meant. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, you can think it down.
Oh boy. Okay. Well, never mind. Okay, I believe you. Go ahead.
Okay.
Sure.
So it's wild, man.
Okay.
So and anyway, it doesn't disable your point. It's
Yeah,
just,
I understand. Yeah.
And so when we're thinking about ADHD medication, like what's the goal here? And that's where like I think we've got to understand two things. One is that even some of the trauma-induced consequences of growing up with ADHD will create ADHD symptoms.
Okay.
Impairment in concentration, difficulty focusing, difficulty with emotional regulation. If you look at the symptomatology of trauma and the symptomatology of ADHD, they overlap.
Okay.
And the real problem that we see with ADHD is when you grow up with ADHD and you get traumatized because you recognize you're just as smart as everyone else, but you can't f***ing do it. It's so easy. They're just sitting there and looking at a book and reading it. That's literally what reading is. It's just looking at a book. You can sit there and look at a book, but you can't read the words. And so you feel incompetent. And as you grow up with that ADHD, you start to experience various micro traumas or even macroscopic traumas. Parents getting mad at you. Why are you like this? Like, you just need to study. You need to try harder. I used to get called into my, teacher's office once a semester for my parent-teacher conference, and they'd say, if he just applied himself, he'd do so well. He's got so much potential. And so that kind of stuff creates its own kind of trauma-induced cognitive deficits. And then if we look at treatment of ADHD, stimulants can correct the neurodivergence, but all that other stuff is not going to get corrected with stimulant. And some of those things, some of the other consequences that happen when we grow up with ADHD is we fail to develop adaptations. So we get worse at developing like emotional regulation techniques and things like that. And the adaptations that we do develop growing up as a neurodivergent kid in a neurotypical world become maladaptations later in life.
Okay.
We're also more vulnerable to things like addictions and stuff like that. So when we look at stimulant medication, a lot of it doesn't get fixed, which confuses a lot of people. A lot of it does. If we look at stimulant medication, most of the research of the meta-analyses suggests that starting it early to prevent all of these psychological impacts will be protective in the long run and lead to better outcomes in terms of lifelong achievement, academic success, et cetera, et cetera. Right? Because this is what you got to understand is you can have ADHD with certain cognitive deficits and untreated ADHD plus cognitive deficits plus failing out of school. What does that do to someone's psychological trajectory, their life trajectory? There's recently a study that showed that the majority of reasons that people are depressed today have nothing to do with like internal feelings or their relationships. They have everything to do with circumstances in their life. Lack of financial stability, living at home, whatever, other kinds of things. Their life objectively sucks. And so when we're thinking about ADHD medication and whether to do it or not do it, I think this is what you really need to think about, is that it's not going to fix everything, but it'll prevent a lot of damage, which is usually why we will medicate kids with ADHD if we choose to. And that even if you start medication as an adult, it's not going to fix everything because there are the consequences of growing up with ADHD that need to be addressed. The last thing to consider is that the effect size of ADHD medication is basically the same or slightly inferior to psychotherapy. And this kind of circles back to like, can I do it without medication? The answer is probably yes, but it takes a concerted effort, which a lot of people don't have the bandwidth for. And there's also data that shows that medicating someone with ADHD makes the effect of psychotherapy better. So when you have someone who can pay attention in psychotherapy, they get a greater effect size. The other cool thing is that the effect of psychotherapy lingers for years after the completion of treatment compared to months for ADHD medication. So this is kind of all a roundabout way of saying, I still think that what you got to do what's right for you and everyone's got to do what's right for them. I think that there's a lot of very real shame and judgment that kids with ADHD develop and then carry into adulthood. And that if you really want to conquer this problem, I think it's usually like a combination of like all the above. So medication, if that's what works for you, psychotherapy, if you have the time and energy for it. And just as a prescriber myself, the primary reason I prescribe medication is when people don't have time to do everything else. That's really, because I think there are very few cases where, at least in psychiatry, we really need medication. Like in most cases, psychotherapy is just as effective as whatever we're prescribing.
Okay.
So I think those are just a couple of considerations.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always fun to chat. Yeah.